Hey everyone, it's Ash here.
And Jared here as well.
We're just going to talk about the Aussie college life and some innovative strategies that you can use in the classroom that we use in Australia. So first of all, we're going to start with, what do you think it's like in Australia? So we've got a list of opinions about Aussie life that we're going to read out, and we'll just elaborate on that. So do you want to start, Jared?
Yeah, sure. So an opinion about Australian life is that it's quite hot and humid, and there's a lot of exotic animals that are quite dangerous. And someone's asked, is there more animals than humanity? And yes, there is quite a few more animals than there are humans in Australia, but they're not really dangerous. They're not really that scary. You just have to provide yourself with caution. There's crocodiles in the north, there's sharks in the ocean, and there's big hairy spiders, but in reality not many Australians ever really come across any dangerous animals that really end up with us in the hospital or losing our lives. It's more of just an international stereotype that Australia's got really dangerous animals.
Yeah, key word there, stereotype. So I agree. I think it's probably blown out of proportion, the animals there. Like, obviously there's some dangerous animals, but unless you're putting yourself out there at risk, then they're not really a danger. Although in saying that, we do have some pretty dangerous snakes, and we've got sharks and stuff like that, but if you're staying clear of them, then you should be sweet. Moving on to opinion 2. So someone's mentioned that they believe Australia is very free, free from people's expectations. Students that are just finishing high school can explore what they want to do in life first, instead of getting pressured or pushed to decide which tertiary education level they're pursuing. And they've said that they believe Malaysia should follow in his footsteps. I would agree that to an extent Australia does have a lot of freedom, and it's a great thing of Australia, but there's obviously some areas where we also don't have freedom. Obviously COVID presented those areas. There's a lot of areas where our freedom was limited, with obviously isolations and just things like that. But yes, with the pressures of high school and stuff, it is a little bit less daunting knowing that you don't need to go straight into university straight afterwards, but it's not really encouraged until you finish your high school. So for me, I was still under pressure to sort of succeed well, and that pressure sort of motivated me to sort of venture out and do something else rather than going straight into university, because I had the mindset that I wasn't capable, and a lot of other kids had the same sort of mindset. So initially there is still a lot of pressure on kids to do well, but afterwards there is an establishment that there are other ways that you can succeed in life, and you don't need to succeed in high school to continue on and do what you want to do in life. So yes and no to that opinion. Jared, your take on the matter?
Well, I think you've pretty much banged it on the head there, Ashley. Yeah, it's quite a fairly free country, but we've certainly experienced a few interim events in the past few years where it's kind of challenged our concept of Australian freedoms and things like that. And yeah, Ashley's quite right. When you do finish school, you can do a gap year, or you can work, or you can explore the world, you can travel. It's commonly an event that Australians like to do. They like to go to backpack in Europe and around Asia. So absolutely, there isn't much of a rigid structure when it comes to a plan for how your life should start once you finish school, or even in school. You kind of do have a bit of a freedom and a determination, a self-determination of how you'd like to travel through life. So
yeah, it's a good thing. Like afterwards now, like it's sort of just a massive weight off my shoulder, and I try and sort of spread that to others in that sort of went through my situation in high school. It's obviously nice to do really well. You want to do your best and everything, but you shouldn't pressure yourself to the point where you sort of change your outlook in life, because that's that's when it gets a bit tricky. Opinion 3, I'm going to let Jared take the lead on this because he's more knowledgeable in this area. So
question 3 is expressed, since Australia is part of the Commonwealth, does the monarch in Britain actually have much of a rule or a say in how we govern our country? It's to an extent they certainly do. So back in 1970, we had a dismissal where a Prime Minister was dismissed by the Governor General, who was put in place by the Queen. So the Queen, or King now, King Charles III, can actually intervene in the Australian Parliament and dismiss a Prime Minister. However, when it comes to the actual ruling, the nature of governing, it's very much like Malaysia. We do not have an elective monarchy like Malaysia does. However, we do have a Governor General who represents, and they will assent bills, and they will pass legislation that the government recommends to be passed. But there isn't necessarily a direct rule from the UK monarchs. Though we still refer to them as the King of Australia. However, it's not to the same extent as you would say the King in Malaysia and the influence of the royal families throughout your states. It's a little bit more mellow and more of just a simplistic constitutional monarchy.
Yeah, just to add to that, so with the king, obviously they have an influence on what legislations and rules come through, but they, correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, but they can't actually implement rules, is that right?
No, absolutely. They can't pass laws or try and make rules or laws for Australians. They need to get the Australian Parliament to pass those laws. So, no, they don't directly rule over us, basically.
Yeah.
So,
Opinion 4. I imagine life in Australia would be very fun. I would love to see the campus life there. Yeah, Australia can be very fun when the weather permits it. As you guys probably know that we suffered the bushfires a few years back, and then since then we've had a few floods. And yeah, so there's obviously a lot that you can do. But like I said, if the weather permits it, it's great. When we can't do it, it's a little bit, I don't know the adjective to describe it, but it's pretty much dependent on the weather. And the last few years has been very, it's made it troubling and made it difficult.
And on that extent, actually raises a good point there. The campus life, for example, the life and the fun, mentioning the weather, it gets really cold in Armidale, where University of New England is, so it will snow in Armidale, so you will end up seeing like snow on your cars, you'll be able to build snowmen, and you'll be able to actually experience some snow, because for you guys would be fairly similar to me. I hadn't seen snow in my entire life until I went to UNE and saw it actually falling from the sky, which was really awesome, because Australia's really hot and there's really not many places that we can go skiing or see snow unless you live in the highlands, basically. So yeah, absolutely, the campus life is, I would say, something you should always look forward to and enjoy. And I would say that any Malaysian student who found themselves trekking over to Australia, living on campus, would absolutely have an amazing time, without a doubt.
Yeah, and we're going to touch more on the opinion of Australia being fun a little bit later. We're going to give you examples of how Australia can be fun. But moving on, opinion 5, it states that Australia is competitive, which I believe. I agree with that opinion. I think especially with the senior years, so the senior years we call it the HSC. I think it might be a little bit different in different states, but for New South Wales we call it the HSC, and it goes off your ranking at the end of it, and that's correlating to what degrees you can study and stuff like that. So when I was talking before about the initial pressures in senior years and not knowing whether you're going to be able to achieve the mark you want to get into your degree, there isn't really much sort of encouragement or promotion that you can obviously succeed after high school through different avenues. So that pressure exists, and obviously that makes it very competitive in nature. And we love our sport, so that's obviously another thing that makes us very competitive. Jared?
No, Ashley's absolutely right. Yeah, Australians are quite competitive. They can get quite hot-headed and easily find a competitive streak in just about any event that goes on. Sport, education, a conversation at the pub can quickly turn into a competition. So, yeah, absolutely. Australians can be quite competitive, but it's a healthy form of competition in general. Like, you won't find yourself coming to blows with anybody over an opinion or an idea. You'll most likely just confront somebody who's quite opinionated and very competitive about their beliefs. So by all means, feel free to express yourselves, but Australians might challenge you on some of your opinions, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, keeps you on your toes. Opinion 6, it's a very detailed one, so we're just going to give you a brief overview. It's mainly specifying that Australia is a big island and the individual would like to be a marine biologist, and I definitely think Australia would be a good place to study. With the Great Barrier Reef and obviously what it's going through at the moment, it would definitely be a great island to explore. And there's also a comment relating to our big scary spiders. The big scary spiders, yeah, I think you've got to worry about the small ones though, because the small ones are the ones that will hurt you. The big ones are just all show. But yeah, moving on to opinion 7. So many opportunities in education, which is a very good thing, and that's true. With our system, we have key learning areas, which is the direction of what we're sort of focusing on. So mathematics, English, science, all that sort of stuff, and that's embedded within the curriculum. So in primary years, that's sort of the focus, and also with that we have general capabilities, which is embedded within the curriculum, and there are things like just being critical and creative thinkers, literacy and numeracy skills, and yeah, things along the line of that. Then when we get to senior years, that continues, but we get experiences of electives, so music, arts, those sort of things. There's sport electives, and by the time you're in your senior years, year 11 and year 12, you actually get to pick all of your subjects. The only subject that is compulsory is English. Outside of that, you can pick whatever subject you like. So you can pick science subjects, which are chemistry, biology. You can pick legal studies. You can pick business studies. So there's a variety of things that you can study to sort of understand whether that's what you want to pursue in the future, which is it's really good because it gives you an opportunity to see if this is what you want to do as a career. Jared?
I think you pretty much summed it up there pretty well. I don't think I could add too much there. There's just lots of opportunity for education, and I think I'll move on to opinion 9, which expresses like Australia has a diverse group of people, which really is indicative of Australia. It's got a fairly large immigrant population. I think there's over 208 languages spoken in Australia. So there's lots of different cultural groups, lots of different opportunities for people to experience an array of culture, which is an amazing thing for an Australian because it enables us to actually experience some authentic culture because we're so far away from the world. It takes us 8 hours to fly here, I think 8 to 10 hours, so it's really awesome to have Malaysian food, there's Thai food, there's Chinese food, so much Asian cuisine, and then we have South American influences, we've got European influences, we've got African influences as well. We generally try to accept as many as asylum seekers as we can. I know there's a bit of a weird press about that, but they all bring a contribution to our country.
Yep.
And it's an amazing thing to experience because I can walk out my front door and eat so much different food, speak to so many different people, and I think that makes Australia realistically a better place.
And it's good to build a network too. Like I've got friends from a variety of different cultures, and it's just nice to know. And in the future, if I ever want to travel to another country, it's just good to know that's where their family's from. So it's just nice to know that I can go to another country and feel welcomed and meet people that know who I know. And yeah, so it's a really good thing.
Absolutely.
Opinion 9. This is relevant to how fun Australia is and how there's a medium for you to share opinions and ideas. And yeah, so similar to our last answer, relating to fun, it's definitely fun, and there's a lot of things you can do. Cost of living is a little bit hard, so the things that you want to do might be a little bit expensive, but there's a lot of things that are free. Our beaches are wonderful, our rivers are really nice, the environment is just nice in general, so yeah, it's a really fun country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ashley's really pretty much summed it up again pretty excellently. You can absolutely share your opinions and your ideas, and you can have fun while doing it as well, so if you ever find yourself in Australia, feel free to express yourself as much as you like and to really find that kind of groove and I guess ethos that you really enjoy and you want to share, because in Australia you can really find your self-determination and figure out what kind of person you want to be, because you can realistically express and share opinions as much as you like, and most people will be willing to share their opinions as well, and you'll learn so much from other people. So absolutely share and talk to as many Australians as you can. They will be generally the most friendly and polite people you will meet, and they really love meeting people who've come from overseas because, like we said before, we don't get an opportunity to experience all that much culture in our Australian way of life unless it comes from people coming to Australia to live or people coming to visit, and that really shines a really awesome light on the idea that you can talk and do as much as you like in the sense of just being who you are. Yeah.
Nicely worded. Opinion 10. There are places where it's extreme. And just to add on that, there are a lot of dangerous species of animals, including kangaroos. Yeah, there are a lot of places where extreme, and kangaroos can be pretty dangerous. I know my partner's car got hit on the side, so a kangaroo side of the car and it actually did quite a bit of damage. And yeah, there's obviously a lot of videos with kangaroos grabbing pets and stuff like that, so they can be dangerous, along with other animals, including snakes, sharks. Pretty much anything alive has a chance of yeah, threatening you. But yeah, Joe, would you like to add?
Oh, I think Ashley's pretty right. Like, you can have a tussle with a kangaroo. They might get in your face a little bit if they're unhappy that you've gone up to them. But generally speaking, they're probably just really interested in what's in your pocket or what you've got to eat.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you'll probably, I wouldn't pat the kangaroo, but you'll be able to get fairly close to the kangaroo. You'll be able to feed it and things like that. You should probably try not to feed the kangaroos too much, but normally you can go to like a petting zoo or a particular Australiana zoo, and they'll have Australian animals there that you'll be able to interact with that are used to the public and willing to actually engage with you, because they're more docile to the idea of human contact compared to more of the other wildlife. So if you go to like Taronga Zoo, you can hold koalas and you can experience and see more of the animals close up without much of the danger involved that everyone seems to be really worried about. So yeah, if you aim for that avenue, you'll be absolutely be able to see a lot of fun parts of Australia. Yeah,
and just to add to that, obviously these animals can be dangerous, but not always, it's not always their nature to act dangerously. So, for example, I've lived in Taree the majority of my life, and we've got the Menning River, a beautiful Menning River, and there's heaps of bull sharks in there, but it hasn't stopped me from swimming in there, and I've lived in the area for over 15 years, and I've never heard of anyone getting mauled to death by a shark or even getting bitten by a shark in the river. So, as long as you be safe, you don't do reckless things, then you should generally be safe. In terms of extreme places, there are quite a few extreme places. Joe, would you like to start?
I'd just say like extreme would be like, you've probably heard of the term the bush or the outback. So if you find yourself going on a solo adventure into the bush or the outback, you need to make sure that you're prepared, well stocked, and understand where you're going, because it's really easy to get lost, and it's really easy to end up basically in the most deserted place in Australia, and it's really difficult for people to find you and to rescue you. People do get lucky, but we often have events where people have been caught up in bushfires in the outback, where people have been stuck in mud for 2 weeks with their family. They know where they are, but they can't move and they can't get to them. And even like you've probably all heard of like the dingo that ate somebody's baby and things like that. So like there is definitely like an extreme kind of situation, particularly with the heat and the fire and the events. But
this is generally if you venture off though. Like if you follow street signs and stuff like that, you're going to be safe. It's just if you're trying to explore it on your own and enter places that aren't really recognised as a national park or something like that, that's when you're going to sort of encounter extreme places. And Australia is pretty renowned for having poor reception too. So if you do find yourself in these extreme places, that's probably a complication itself. But yeah, it's not as bad as the stigma and the stereotyping. Obviously there's some dangerous animals, but like I said, if you just be safe and don't be reckless, and yeah, nothing's going to happen of it. Opinion 11. Life in Australia is interesting. How they take self-learning and inclusive education seriously. And pupils having their own authority of their learning instead of being controlled and spoon-fed with each lesson. Yeah, to an extent, obviously you still have teachers that are just there for the sake of it, and that can't really be helped. With our teacher shortage at the moment, it's sort of hard to sort of filter out the good and the bad teachers. So some teachers just choose to spoon-fed their students, but it's really dependent on the teacher, and they follow a curriculum and syllabus, but their choice of learning and how they teach the content, there's a lot more flexibility. So it does provide students with an engaging and interesting lesson if the teachers decide to go that avenue. Jared?
Oh, I think once again Ashley really has summed it up well. There is absolutely a capacity for you to take authority of your own learning and have engagement as much as you like. The students even sometimes get an input on what text they'd like to study, what topic they like, because the teacher really wants the students to enjoy learning and to actually take part of it. Because if you aren't realistically and really enjoying what you're learning, then you're just going to switch off, just like any normal human being, because nobody really wants to listen to something that's really boring or disinteresting. So absolutely, there is an awesome opportunity for you to kind of gauge your own learning, but it still has a curriculum and a structure that defines what within a scope we're allowed to actually teach. So we certainly can't just decide to teach you guys the plot to Shrek, the first movie, or anything like that. We actually have to follow the guidelines that the Department of Education sets us. So it's a mixture of both of them in effect.
Yeah, but that's the thing with the curriculum, though. You can sort of justify how your lesson's going to follow a content descriptor, which is a term we use that describes the content we're following. Generally, we follow a learning sequence, but every now and again, there's an individual lesson that is in place. So for casual teachers, if there isn't anything organised, they may have their pre-organised lessons, and that may relate to a particular content descriptor. For example, modifying the classroom to transition into a somewhat escape room and have an escape room theme to apply critical and creative thinking. They can use skills that require mathematical or English knowledge and skills. So yeah, there is definitely the ability for teachers to modify the content to use to their advantage. But like Jared said, we still need to follow the content descriptors and the curriculum. Yeah, so unfortunately Molly wasn't able to come today. She was feeling unwell, but we have a few videos just to describe our personalities and just a little bit more of an insight to us. So we're going to share that with you now.
I'm losing it.
Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about uni life and in particular the college life that UNE provides. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how do we socialise with our peers? Well, our university, it's an online university as well as on-campus university, and I've actually done my whole degree purely online. Jared, however, has done a combination of both. Jared's going to speak a little bit about the on-campus experience, and then we're going to talk about how we socialise with peers through an online and an on-campus experience. Mm-hmm. So Jared?
Yeah, absolutely. So on-campus experience is somewhat similar to how you guys experience on-campus life here in Malaysia. So we have dormitories on campus. We call them colleges though, and we have several colleges which are going through a bit of a change, but most of the time there's about 250 to 300 students who live in a college together, and the college itself helps us with pastoral care. It helps us with, we get free psych sessions, we have an academic mentor, and we also have older students who will provide academic mentorship as well to first years and second years who are struggling to fit into college and also just to fit into university, because for a lot of people moving to Armidale, I've had people move from Humpty Doo in the Northern Territory, people have come from Perth in Western Australia, people have come from Mackay in far north Queensland, people have come from Melbourne and Tasmania down in Southern Australia. So it's realistically a huge collection of Australians and international students as well, who all coalesce together into the one campus and then into separate colleges. And within that college life, we have meals just like you guys do. Although in general, I do believe that you guys get better food than we do, to be honest. So I think you guys have got that one over us for sure. And realistically, we also have weekly, we go out to socialize at a pub. Doesn't mean you have to drink. We normally just dance and have fun. We engage with one another. It's a good way to get along. And every weekend we have a student-run party that raises money and does fun events for us, so that at the end of the year we can have a fancy ball where we all get to wear like tuxedos and nice dresses, and we have a really nice dinner and just celebrate the fact that we survived the year of university, basically. So it's definitely a really fun experience, but it can be very full on, and it can really take away from your capacity to study well, because you're just so engrossed in your social life that you completely forget that you've got to do a university degree.
Yeah, so just adding to that, socializing with peers, face-to-face interactions, I think Jared summed it up on campus. With online though, it's obviously different because people are based everywhere in Australia and sometimes even based overseas. I was actually currently doing a subject while I was over here, so I was obviously studying Malaysia rather than Australia. So with face-to-face interactions though, UNE does offer UNE facilities in several locations, rural locations, and my hometown Taree, that actually has a UNE facility, so I'm able to go there and collaborate with my peers. A lot of the peers don't study the same degree I'm studying, but it's still nice to go there and just sort of have an interaction with someone that is also going through UNE, because sometimes we have the same unit coordinators and stuff like that, and it's just good to have that face-to-face interaction. Outside of that, there's a lot of different ways that you can socialize with your peers online. For starters, there's forum posts. So every subject's a little bit different, but generally they recommend that you post in a forum to introduce yourself, and throughout the session just contribute to your ideas and your opinions based on the subject and based on a question that the unit coordinator creates. On top of that, we use the forum post to ask questions to other students, ask questions to the unit coordinator, and that's just a little way to sort of communicate that helps us really get to know each other as much as it does actually help us learn the content. Anything you want to add, Jared?
No, Ashley, once again, he's got the online experience, which I've somewhat experienced towards the end of my degree, but he's pretty much really explained that well. We mostly have to use social media engagement. We might have intensives or anything like that, which means that we actually have to travel to the Armidale campus if we study online for 2 weeks, and we go to class every day to catch up and to just reiterate all of the learning that we've done during the year, and any lectures that we might need to do. That's particularly prevalent for drama students, for science students, and sometimes you have to go for education, but very rarely, because it's you've got prac and other events, so you can't necessarily just uproot your life for 2 weeks and go, because we have to uproot our life for 4 weeks and go teach in a school generally, give or take your primary or secondary. Some primary school teachers have to teach for a whole term or 7 weeks, so it's definitely way more difficult to ask education students to uproot their life and go and attend an intensive. And besides that, just the general good old Zoom call or social media. There's probably the easiest way for us to interact with one another.
Yep.
With this year. Anything to add, Ashley, to that?
Yeah, just to add to the intensives, generally, like Jared said, it's usually for science and drama. So intensives are usually only required if your assessment within this subject requires you to do something hands-on, which would be very difficult to do online. So for myself, I did have an intensive in my first year. However, COVID abolished that, so I was unable to do that. Outside of that, I have no requirement assignments to do intensive. So that pretty much means that I can spend my whole degree just purely from a keyboard and a computer. Another thing that Australia offers is called PASS sessions. It's peer assisted study success. Peer assisted study sessions, and I'm actually a PASS leader myself, and I've attended PASS sessions in the past. And what it is a leader, and they're leaders that have done a subject in the past and done quite well, and they'll mentor the students. They'll run a 1 hour Zoom session every week, and they'll just run activities. So I like to run Kahoots just to refresh memory and sort of offer repetition. But yeah, that 1 hour is just devoted for everyone to get together, because being online, it's very isolating. So we get together, we get to know each other, we contribute about the subject, and we pretty much just, we engage with each other. Moving on, how do we learn content from an online and an on-campus experience in UNE? Would you like to start, Jared?
I'll start with the on-campus experience. So it's somewhat similar to the online experience in the sense that you attend the lecture, of course, but normally when we're attending the lectures, they're recording them to put them online. So any engagement or anything that we have will be put onto the online for the online students. So that includes generally tutorials as well, and all lectures are recorded so they can go online. So in effect, it's almost like you receive the same lecture irrespectively whether you're online or on campus, because it's recorded and delivered the same way. The main difference is generally you are physically and present, so it makes it a little bit more difficult because the lecture will be on at 1 o'clock and you have to work until 9 till 12, which means you've got to quickly scoff down some lunch, get dressed into some more comfy clothes and scoot off to lectures. And sometimes you rock up and you're exhausted and you've got to sit there for 2 hours and listen to a lecture where you'd really wish that you could just have gone home and napped and done it online, but you really want to take advantage of it. You can go and actually visit the campus and stay, but once again, it does have negatives attached to it, which the online capacity is a lot better for freedom and the ability to determine when you want to study and not necessarily be forced into a timetable and structured learning like that, which means that you realistically can determine your own study schedule and make a timetable that suits your life. So that is probably the main difference I feel for the on-campus to the online, is that it's just very structured with timetables, because you've got to work around the lecturers. They're busy, they've got kids, they've got lives. They can't wait around all day to pick the perfect time for you. So when they're assigned and when they're done, that's when they're recorded, and that's when we have to attend real physical lectures. But Ashley, would you want to add anything for the online lectures?
Yeah, so just to add to the online, the way we do it in particular is we have live lectures and tutorials in Zoom meetings, but generally they're not always a requirement, they're not compulsory. So when they're live, they're generally recorded and you can watch them the next day. And the tutorials might be an activity that you need to do throughout the week, and that might relate to the forum post that I was talking about before, just contributing to your own ideas. Also with that, we also have pre-recorded lectures and tutorials that you actually can't watch live. And these pre-recorded lectures and tutorials, they may actually be lectures and tutorials from previous years. So, for example, there's a few tutorials and lectures that I watched this year that were based from 2020. So it's a little bit outdated, though they try and make it as relevant as possible with the activities and the assignments. On top of that, we also have online textbooks that we read from with prescribed readings every week. We also have, with our placements, to enable us to have the experience, we have a little bit less experience required. I think I heard some of the students say that their first placement was about 3 months, whereas in Australia, the requirements are only really 16 weeks all up. So my placements have consisted of a 3-week, a 4-week, another 4-week, and my last placement will be a 7-week placement. So they're definitely a lot shorter, but I believe that's aligned with our teacher shortage at the moment, and we're just trying to get teachers. Just to add to the teacher shortage, with teachers in Australia that are studying a degree, in your final year of teaching, in your final year of your studies, you can actually start casual teaching. So Jared has still got a couple of subjects left, but he's had the ability to start teaching now and get paid for his casual teaching. The last thing that also UNE offers is the overseas experience, which is what we are currently doing. So they allow students to go over and experience their course and their studies in a different environment, just to gain an insight of culture and just how the world operates outside of Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Ash is pretty much spot on there. The overseas experience is probably one of the best parts of UNE's offering for us as students. You don't often get many, I'd say, free benefits from university besides stress, lots of study, and the needing to get assessments done. So when the opportunity ever arises to explore the world, especially from a university scholarship, which UNE affords, take the opportunity, because coming to Malaysia has probably been it's probably the most fun experience in a long time. So.
100%, yep. So the next point, how do we manage and survive studying in Australia? Well, as Jared mentioned, a lot of us have to work part-time or full-time just to get an income while we're studying. In particular, online students, that's mainly the motivation to study online, so that you're able to work your normal hours and study outside of those hours. There's also government programs such as Centrelink, which allow students to be full-time students and still receive a payment from the government. That generally is for students that go on campus. However, students that do stay at home or they don't travel to study, they're still able to receive that at a reduced amount. There's also things in Australia that students do to earn a little bit of extra income. We do little side hustles like return and earn. So with every aluminium can or plastic bottle, we can take that to our local return and earn location, and every can or bottle we get 10 cents back. So if we've had a few friends over and we've collected a few bottles and just over time we're able to return that, and over time you can get $5 to $10, which goes a long way as a uni student. And yeah, another way to sort of manage and survive with the cost of living as a student is a lot of students have shared accommodation, just like in Malaysia. So they'll obviously share a dorm together on campus, or if they're studying online, they may even share an apartment or a house and just split the rent. Jared?
And another way that students make money, one of my friends actually, she does a side hustle. If you guys aren't familiar with the term side hustle, it's kind of a jargon term for basically they take on extracurricular activities, such as they'll sell. My friend, for example, she makes notepads, scrunchies, sunnies, textbook covers, like you name it. She just does all this creative stuff because she's quite creative. She's done a design degree, so she kind of creates all of these cool, quirky things and she sells them online. So it creates generally a bit of income for her and things like that, and it enables her to keep a work-life study balance so that she can spend less time working, more time doing something creative and fun and earning a profit from it, and then also dedicating time to study. And it kind of creates a holistic effort together where her side hustle supports her study, but it also supports her development in her studies as well. So yeah, there's absolutely an imperative need to have access to income in Australia when you're studying, whether that be work or Centrelink, because Australia does have a high cost of living and it can be very tough on students.
Yeah, moving on, we're going to talk about how we spend our free time. So that relates to how Australia can be fun. A few things that I like to do. I like to visit the beach. I only live 15 minutes from one of my local beaches. There are actually a lot of beaches in the area that I live, so the furthest beach that is easily accessible is about half an hour. And yeah, so there's a lot of beaches, there's a lot of rivers, so I do a lot of swimming, I do a lot of fishing, I do a lot of jet skiing as well. I go out on boats and do tubing and stuff like that. So yeah, that just relates to when we have really good weather, when the weather permits it, we have really good conditions to do that sort of thing. We also are able to interstate travel and go to, because Jared and I are from New South Wales, we're able to go to Queensland, and Queensland offers nice attractions, like they've got the theme parks, they've got the Australian Crocodile Zoo, and things like that. We also like to play sports in our free time and go to the gym and just be active. And yeah, Jared, did you want to add anything?
Absolutely. So I just to add to Ash's beach thing, I think I know a fun fact, which is I think if you were to visit a beach every day in Australia, it would take you 30 years to visit every single beach. So there's a lot of beaches in Australia. So you could start at 5 years old and end up at 35 and seen every beach. So, and some people try and actually visit every beach in a little minivan and things like that. So, yeah, Australians really love their beach. Interstate travel, fishing. We love water sports and water recreation because it's quite warm, like you guys know. So we love to go out and keep cool and just really enjoy the outdoors because 90% of the time the weather is lovely and the other 10% of the time the weather's just trying to destroy us. So yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so those are the few things about uni life, in particular the online and on-campus college life experience. So now we're going to look at some innovative ideas in the Australian school context that we've applied or witnessed firsthand. The first thing we're going to talk about is a framework. It's a guideline, Universal Design for Learning. And what that is, it's a guide that's promoted in Australia to provide multiple means of engaging representation and actions and expressions. And this is to promote inclusivity. So in the Australian classroom, we encourage everyone to go to school and everyone to go to a public school or private school, and anyone has the opportunity to go to school. So with that, there's sometimes classrooms with various students with identified learning needs, identified learning difficulties and disabilities, and diverse learning styles. So to account for that, we use a framework, UDL, so we can represent information differently. We can engage students differently by recruiting interest, and we can also alter the way actions and expressions are required to complete assignments and tasks. So there's a photo there that goes into a little bit more detail. If you'd like that photo, we'll send it through to you. But yeah, it's a very good framework that you can sort of utilize to create your lesson plans and acknowledge if a lesson's not going too well, how to make it more appropriate for students with diverse learning needs. Anything you'd like to add, Jared?
I think you've really summed that up pretty well. Ash has described the UDL pretty much perfectly there, so I don't think I can add too much to it. But it's absolutely a really important framework, and it absolutely will support any teacher that adopts it into their classroom. Yeah, and absolutely feel free to ask us any questions about it as well if you aren't too sure or you'd like to implement it further in your own class, because we're more than happy to talk about it.
The next thing we're going to talk about is play-based learning, but more specifically using video games in play-based learning, because video games obviously have a correlation to engaging and increasing interest for students. There's two ways in particular we're going to talk about video games. The first one Joe is going to talk about, and then I'm going to talk about the other.
So, for example, video games can really support, for myself, I'm a history teacher and English teacher, so video games can really support a student's understanding of historical events where they can actually undertake them and experience them. So World War II or World War I, there's video games that replicate that. But more importantly than just the what of experiencing it, it teaches students jargon, characters, dates, everything that you necessarily need that would come from a textbook, but it's done in an incorporated in a fantastic way where it's visual, it's stimulating, and they might actually genuinely want to play it again and again and again, which is far, far superior than asking a student to read a paragraph 3 times over. So it really does support their learning in the sense that if it's done correctly, it can really support a student's learning and interest in a topic that they may have actually been standoffish or not necessarily very interested in the past, because the teacher hasn't made it interesting and hasn't made it, I guess, relevant in the 21st century, because everybody loves to play video games, everybody loves to have fun. So incorporating that into education is an essential part. So video games such as, like, you can play Age of Empires, Civilization, even Call of Duty if it's done right. Minecraft is done a lot, and absolutely anything that incorporates certain terminology, language development, and has a good storyline, then it's almost essentially perfect for teaching in a class.
Yeah, it's like using Nintendo Switch Just Dance and stuff like that, because that relates to improving fundamental movements and stuff like that. So there are definitely ways that you can integrate play-based learning with video games. One in particular is a program called Scratch, and this program you're able to design not only games, but you can design movies, animations, things like that, and it allows students to develop and improve their critical and creative thinking. And there's various applications that relate to the curriculum as well. For example, my last subject, I had to create I had to code something using Scratch. I had to code 4 games, and one of the games that I focused on was Pong. So the game where it requires a paddle to prevent the ball from hitting the surface area. Students are able to do that and apply critical creative thinking, and then they can expand on that and use that in an area that's going to be very related. So numeracy, English, and science, things like that. So using play-based learning is a way to provide multiple means of engaging students and representing information and providing multiple means of action and expression. Moving on, relating to technology, one framework that I've come across recently is the PICRAT framework. And this is a technology framework that teachers can apply to provide appropriate technology in the classroom that allows students to have an optimal opportunity to learn, but also provides teachers to have an optimal opportunity to use the right resources to teach. So as you can see on the picture, there's an abbreviation for PIC, which stands for passive, interactive, and creative. And then there's also the RAT, which replaces, amplifies, and transforms the teacher's use of technology in traditional practices. So you can use these to sort of look at your current teaching practices and the tools that you're currently using to teach your students. And you can use that to question whether using a different form of technology will replace it, amplify it, or transform the learning that would make the learning completely different without that type of technology. Similarly, you can use that technology to observe how it's going to improve the student's relationship with that technology, whether it's going to make them apply higher order thinking skills, or whether their current technology is only applying the low order thinking skills of remembering and recalling. For instance, the C for PIC, that's the creative area. Using a technology such as creating a podcast is enabling a student to demonstrate their learning in a creative manner that relates to the higher order thinking skills in Bloom's taxonomy. Jade, anything you'd like to comment?
I'll just say that previously mentioning on that video game slide and things like that, incorporating this with the video game will ensure that you holistically understand and support the students in what they're doing. So you can use a model and a framework, and then something fun like a video game to ensure that the teacher isn't necessarily lost in translation or uncertain about how to transact a video game into learning, because it often does come attached with a sense it's just more entertainment than education. So using a framework like Ash has described so well really ensures that the teacher can incorporate the key components of what it is you're trying to get across at the end of the day, because without an effective model you can sometimes end up just realistically having a lesson that ends up with just kids having fun and not actually necessarily learning much from the use of technology, because technology can be disruptive and it can be kind of like a vortex in a classroom where kids are more interested in listening to music and playing games than they are on actually the task and the focus. So I think using something like that PIC model or the RAT model will ensure that teachers can actually incorporate effective learning with ICT.
I totally agree. Moving on, in Australia we have a PBL learning program. It's not enforced in every schools, but most public schools do enforce it. So with PBL, it relates to positive behaviour learning. So we're trying to promote students to demonstrate values. Most schools have 3 core values. My primary school had respect, responsibility, and personal best, and that was integrated in the classroom and the whole school approach. So these core values, when they were exemplified and demonstrated, teachers would encourage students by Teachers would encourage students by rewarding and offering incentives. For instance, there were movie days where students consistently didn't litter and they used the trash cans appropriately, and they showed respect. For example, Spirit Day, as shown, that was something that was end of term. So students that demonstrated their core values consistently were able to partake in Spirit Day, where it was just a full day of fun activities with a little bit of a competitive nature. It would be separated in sport groups, and sport groups would have a little bit of fun versing each other in different activities, and at the end of the day we'd all come together in our sport groups and we would create a war cry and present that war cry, and the winner of the Spirit Day actually received a little reward based on their school group, their sport group. So yeah, the PBL is a really good system to promote students to partake, participate, and demonstrate the core values that you would like to show in the classroom. Jared?
To add on to what Ash has described there, each school will do a very similar kind of event. Some may do something different, and some schools may do similar events. But for example, on top of Ash's example of different types of things that your school can introduce for following behaviour, good classroom behaviour, and participating in the work and being respectful to your teachers and peers. My school did an amazing race event where they mocked the TV show The Amazing Race, and we had to run around our local government area, so all over the Central Coast in New South Wales, and we had to go bowling and get a strike to get our little ticket to continue on. We had to do little puzzles and solve questions and quizzes to get the envelope so we could continue on in our group, and it was done so that each group could then run and get onto the bus, and then they got first position on the bus, so then they could run off the bus and then start the competition. Just like The Amazing Race, when somebody's got a lead and an advantage, they get an opportunity to go first and second and third. So it was an awesome day to just actually experience some fun, but it wasn't just complete entertainment. It had an educational perspective to it, and to ensure that students work towards those goals is that if your student has misbehaved or has presented with misadventure throughout the year, they're not allowed to participate due to the safety of staff and other students, and they will most likely have to stay at school for the day and just continue on with their schoolwork, just purely because it would be too unsafe and not fair to the other students that a disruptive student who hasn't participated throughout the year gets to enjoy themselves on a fun educational day when other students have put in a lot of effort throughout the year.
Yeah, just to add to the BBL, there's a massive problem in the classroom with students being engaged and interested in their learning. So this is just an incentive also to ensure students maintain the respect to the teacher, they partake in activities and they participate. And it's been very effective. It relates to strategic directions integrated with the school's personalised strategic improvement plan to improve qualities in their school that in the past haven't been great. And yeah, so with the PBL, they're able to make those improvements, obviously aligned with other things, but yeah, the PBL is definitely a program that promotes engagement, and it increases students' interest within the classroom. Moving on, Joe, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So on top of that PBL, our school had an approach of an event where they showed off students' work, and to teachers, not to teachers, to their parents, and teachers would choose different examples from the classroom. So, and every subject also was included. So you have English, history, science, geography, maths, PE, all the subjects were included. And this particular event was called Kaleidoscope Night, because if you look into a kaleidoscope, you see an array of colours. So it represents an array of subjects, and we would present our speeches, or we show our essays or our artwork to our parents. And more so than for the parents, though, this was about showing that the school respects students' achievements and that it really actually values what you've done and what you've contributed to the school community. It's not necessarily about showing just your parents how great of a writer you are. It's about showing that you've achieved something, the school values you, and that you can contribute to a wider community and actually show your progress, development, and educational skills. Because at the end of the day, if your parents and your peers aren't aware of some of their achievements and your achievements, then it kind of falls away, and students don't necessarily feel as though they have perfected and learnt something, because there's no respect and engagement to that learning. So it's kind of just like, congratulations, you finished your essay, let's go on to the next topic. It's actually like, no, hold on a minute, we're going to actually show off our students' achievements, show them respect, and actually represent the school community for its awesome achievements.
Yeah, just to add to that, schools do merit awards as well. So weekly they'll offer awards for students that have consistently showed respect in the classroom, have consistently tried their best, and things like that, just to demonstrate that they acknowledge that they're trying their best and they're doing well. It's just a little incentive to show students that we acknowledge your efforts and we appreciate it, rather than disregarding it to prevent students from continuing their efforts. Moving on, another thing that each subject does differently but tries to implement is we try and implement different perspectives. So with that, Jared's a history major, so he'll actually provide a good example.
So, for example, you could talk about World War One, the home front in Europe. You could compare the experience of a German man to a British man. You could compare the experience of a British woman to a German woman, a German child to a British parliamentarian, or even more gruesome, a soldier on the front on either side. They will each have a different perspective, and they'll each have a different outlook on what's actually going on. So students can learn to critically think from other perspectives, have empathy, sympathy, but also be able to critically think and adopt what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, and then also be able to categorize that into their writing and learning so that they can discuss pros and cons, negatives and positives, and actually share and engage what it's like to be an individual in another country, so that it really enhances their learning, because it gets to that why stage, that how stage of critical thinking, because it's all very well and good to know what's going on, but how did people feel? What kind of events did they experience? And compare those two events to two different people, and you'll have two very different opinions.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key word, opinions. It's allowing students to formulate their own opinions. It's allowing them to prevent being closed-minded and more open-minded, and seeing things from different perspectives, which I think is very important, and it can be integrated in many subjects. Geography, for example, we generally do field work every now and again with this different year levels. And an example, you could go to a local park and you could talk about the value of the park and how different people value that park, which really it's talking about the different perspectives. It makes the students engage and think about how a granddad would like to visit the park, how their children would like to visit the park, how parents like to visit the park, and why they visit the park. And it's very important for students to understand different perspectives, because it allows them to develop various ideas rather than just one idea.
No, absolutely. I think you're right, because at the end of the day, we all share and live in a society together. So understanding what your fellow humans are going through, even just on the street, and what purpose things have, different perspectives really ensures that you kind of create a global citizen mindset where you represent and view the world through a larger lens rather than an insular local lens.
Yeah, so there are a few things that we think are very innovative in the Australian education system. There are a few more, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we'll be happy to provide those answers.
Absolutely, yeah. By all means, ask away.
Okay, moving on to the questions and answers now. Jared and I are going to answer some of the questions, and obviously, like we just mentioned, everyone's entitled to a different opinion. So Jared's going to answer one question, and I'm going to also answer a question, and we may have a different opinion. But yeah, so Jared, first question.
So the first question is, system in Malaysia compared to Australia similar or different? Like I said to Ash before, I find the similarities and differences, they almost match. So like as many similarities as there are differences. So it can be extreme. So we all have the same kind of social culture. My topics in class the other day were very similar to like UNE English and things like that. So we do have similarities, but the roaring differences that come to light from experiencing Malaysian culture and schools firsthand is kind of enlightening. So there's a lot more of a religious focus, for example, in a Malaysian school, where we won't have that in Australia. There will be a lot more of a rigid structure to determine your educational outcomes depending upon tests and things like that, where Australia won't necessarily define your future from a test. It's more or less just standardized testing to figure out where funding might need to go or where students might need to be supported and things like that. So while there are similarities, there are many differences. So I think by that point, I mean, as you find a similarity, you'll find a difference. As you find a similarity, you'll find two more differences. So you'll just end up finding that whilst they are somewhat similar, because education is education, there are very extreme differences in some components.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a few similarities, but I also think there's quite a few differences. Just touching on the religion side of things, for instance, religion in public schools, it's actually not compulsory. Religion's only taught within Scripture, but it's not mandatory, so you have the option to go to that or not. Whereas private schools, most private schools, they do teach religion. So if you want to learn about religion, you would then have to go to a private school. Whereas public schools, which are free schools in Australia, they don't really talk about religion. So that's one difference. And yeah, I think another difference is I believe Malaysian schools have more of a family culture. Everyone seems to get along here, whereas, like someone mentioned before, as an Australian opinion, we are very competitive, so sometimes we clash a lot with our peers. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're all nasty to each other, but I just feel as if there's a lot more of a family culture within the school settings in Malaysia. And yeah, so the second question, what do you think is the best feature of education in Malaysia? I think that relates to what I just mentioned, the difference in Australia. I really like the fact that everyone feels like a family here and everyone gets along and respects each other culturally. I know Australia does respect each other culturally, but there's some areas in Australia where people can be very nasty and quite rude and naive, and that's one thing I would really want Australia to phase out. Whereas in Malaysia, what I've witnessed so far, I believe that having that family connection, everyone's very respectful of their differences in culture.
Absolutely, Ash is pretty much spot on there again. I really enjoy the concept of calling everyone uncle and auntie in the wider community, and how you guys have communal lunch and recess together. Those sort of things don't necessarily happen in Australia, so you might necessarily have your social group, which could be similar to Malaysia, of course, but you guys all have like a dining hall set up here, where Australians would just sit in a playground or on a bench, which can only accommodate a couple of students, not 18 or 10 students, where you guys can all chat and get along. And the I kind of
lost your thought. That's all right. Question 3. If you were given a chance to improve Malaysian education system, what would you do, change, or what modification would you bring? So I think the only thing I can really think of off the top of my head to improve the Malaysian system would maybe perhaps offer more of a selection in the senior years, provide students with an option of what they would like to study. Outside of that, I think I would need to experience the education system a little bit more to have more of an input, but that's something I noticed, that comparing to Australia with Malaysia, having the autonomy to sort of select what you want to study can really help you in your further studies and your further career outcomes. Jared?
Absolutely, Ash. I agree with that as well. It would be nice to see some more flexibility and self-determination for Malaysian students in subjects that they get to choose and what kind of outcomes they'd like to achieve in school. Obviously, you guys have it very structured and rigid set with your tests and with some of your expectations when you travel throughout your education experience. So I would really enjoy and aspire to see that Malaysia kind of adopts somewhat of an Australian model, but I also enjoy the seriousness and the legitimacy that you guys have and treat with education here. Some of them that's lacking in Australia. People don't necessarily value school as much as I've noticed that Malaysian students really do value their education, and they really do value the opportunities. Sometimes that's lost on Australian students until it's a little too late. But more often than not, it's just the realistic capacity to be able to determine what it is that you'd like to do in your future and to be able to make yourself happy, because happiness is really the pursuit of all life, I generally believe. So, and education is the cornerstone to that. So being able to study something that you enjoy, but also being able to then go on and make a career out of that and make you happy would be something that I would really aspire that Malaysia might adopt. But that's the difference, and the best thing about countries is that we all have our differences, and that gives us our strengths as well.
Yes. So moving on to question 4. This relates to Australians having inclusive classrooms, so anyone's welcome to be in a classroom. The question is, how do you assess pupils with severe cases of learning disabilities? So in the Australian system, in primary, for example, we have KLAs, which is the key learning areas, but we've also got general capabilities. 2 general capabilities that are very emphasised within the school system is literacy and numeracy skills. Within that, we have literacy and numeracy progressions, their learning progressions, and what we do is there's a diagnostic assessment in kindergarten to sort of gauge where students currently are, and we pinpoint what areas need improvement within their literacy levels. So that could be their spelling, phonemic awareness, phonological knowledge, comprehension, things like that, and as well as numeracy levels. And with that, we sort of determine how they are, and that diagnostic assessment's used throughout the year to see how their progression is and how their growth is. And obviously, if there's not much growth happening, then that assessment in itself will determine if there's an area that they may need to improve in, or maybe there might be something that's influencing that learning. So yeah, that's sort of how we assess pupils with severe cases of learning disabilities. It's pretty much a whole holistic approach, and through that we're able to recognise with a standpoint where students' level should be. If a student in year 6, for instance, is meant to be at level, hypothetically level 7, but they're at a kindergarten level, not only would they show that throughout their years, but for an example, if someone's moved schools and they've presented that level, then that would clearly show that there may be a learning disability. And yeah, anything else, Jared?
On top of what Ash has explained, it kind of extends like that as well into secondary school. We tend to focus if a student does have a learning disability or isn't able to engage within the mainstream curriculum, but we have something called life skills, so we ensure that students still have the literacy and numeracy skills to go out into society and find a job and work, but it doesn't necessarily have the same severe curriculum that the mainstream students will have to actually engage with, because it'll be a more simplistic form that is based around trying to develop skills and concepts for them that's going to support their life and ensure that they have the life skills to engage in society, prosper, and to actually be successful without necessarily having to be stressed, anxious, and feeling bad about themselves because they can't manage the stress and their disability as the able students can to finish that curriculum in that mainstream. So we try and cater for all students in that inclusive classroom so that realistically no one's left behind, and that every student does have an opportunity, irrespective of their background, that they will be able to succeed and prosper in life.
Yeah, so a very similar question in question 5. Do the special needs students, are they separated from others? So yeah, so like we just mentioned, in Australia, the Disability Standards Act, it enables every student to have the same opportunity and equitable opportunity to learn. So that means that sometimes reasonable adjustments need to take place to allow that student to have the same opportunity as another student. Alternatively, if a student has a severe disability and a school has various of students with a severe disability, generally if they get the funding, they will get a special education support unit, and students will go into there. However, if the school doesn't have the funding to provide a support unit, unfortunately there's students within a classroom of say 32 students, and there may be a student with a learning disability that is unable to get to the level of the other students, and that's probably a flaw in the Australian system. Though there are still ways that we try to engage them and provide them the equitable opportunity. Jared?
Well, I think you pretty much summed that up pretty well there. There isn't realistically too much that Ash hasn't added to pretty much describe how Australia tries to really ensure that every student has an education.
Yeah, so moving on, question 6 directed at myself because obviously I'm studying inclusive education. How do I deal with an ADHD pupil who are really aggressive to their friends, both verbally and physically? Well, my answer to this is not all students with ADHD are aggressive. They are prone to have mood swings. I know this because I was diagnosed with ADHD myself as a younger me. But I think it's more of an individual base, because violent tendencies are really, they're a factor of the nurture of a child. And nature does play a part. But yeah, so not all ADHD students are going to be violent, but to cater to the students that are violent, that really aligns with our core values. And if they're not demonstrating those core values, not only are they going to receive the rewards of the PBL system, but they're going to get punishments through detention, potentially suspensions, and if need be, they may get expelled. But in Australia, if students are very violent, the law may take place, and there's a possibility that, depending how violent they are, they may end up in juvenile centre. So yeah, but things like verbally bullying someone, it's not accepted in schools. So that's something that teachers really reinforce and make sure that students are not doing. Yeah, Joe?
I don't really have too much experience with ADHD personally, but I know that I've had friends, and my older brother has it. Most of the time, they just find it more difficult to fit in. Sometimes it's very hard to concentrate, and they just generally find that frustrating, and they take that frustration out in many different forms and ways, which can be physical or verbal communication, which can sometimes lead to violence. But a lot of the time, students just need to, who have ADHD, just need to find a niche that really suits them. So particularly for my brother, he really loves sport, and he got accepted into a sports school and was actually able to channel a lot of his ADHD into his desire to become a football player, because that's really what he wanted to do, as all young boys really want to do. So it actually gave him some structure and a framework, and then also it enabled him to then focus on his schoolwork, because he was ticking his personal goals, which enabled him to feel less frustrated and less anxious, and actually just focus on the school and what he wanted to achieve in his life, rather than necessarily that kind of maelstrom of mental malaise where you're just uncertain of what you want to do and how to concentrate, because ADHD can be very intense, and you can be constantly thinking 24/7, non-stop thoughts. So it's realistically about trying to find that drive and that perspective that makes that student feel more respected and can contribute to themselves and to their education.
Yeah, just to add to that, ADHD does have 3 types. So an individual can be hyperactive, which usually has impulsive tendencies, so calling out in the classroom, fidgeting and things like that. They could also be inattentive, so it's really hard for them to focus and pretty much engage in the lesson. And then there's also the combination of both. So with that in mind, you can definitely see how a student may feel frustrated at times to get their point across, because if they're inattentive or if they're hyperactive, they may be very, very motivated to get their point across as quick as possible. But generally, we try to teach skills in schools to promote students to demonstrate the core values, and that those skills, they relate to social skills that like turn taking, sharing, and things like that. So those are things that we embed early on in school, so that we allow students to develop social skills to prevent them from doing things like violent, verbal and physical violence. So yeah, the next list of questions are just general topic. No, these are new questions. So yeah, so first question, how do you perceive the wildlife in Australia? Are there a bunch of interesting additions in your daily lives, or are they a hassle to deal with? It depends on the animal. Magpies, for instance, they can be very, very annoying, depending on the season. So if it's mating season, you could be riding your bike and you may feel a bird start pecking you in the back of your head. And that's just magpies for you. But yes, some animals can be very, very annoying, but some animals, they just stick to themselves. Joe?
Yeah, our perception of the wildlife is they're just part of our culture and effects. So we really cherish them to an extent, and we definitely don't see them as much of a threat as a lot of international visitors really perceive them to be. So like, we realistically just treat them with general caution, stay out of their way, and we just rehome them if they find their way into our bathroom or into our bedroom, or God forbid even into our bed. So like, it's never necessarily an issue if we come across wildlife, because most of them are just kind of like creepy crawlies. We don't really have like big bears or scary wolves or anything like that. So most of the time it's just patience, calm, and just relocating the animal.
Another point is, outside looking in, it's obviously daunting. However, because we've grown up with it, it's just what we know, so we know how to deal with those animals. Question 2. Are there any differences between the weather here in Australia? Well, I was a little bit surprised that it wasn't as hot in Malaysia than it is in Australia, but then I realised that it is not summer here in Malaysia, but it is summer in Australia, so that probably correlates as to why it's not as hot as Australia at the moment. So I can't really comment unless I experience the other seasons. However, I do think at the moment the weather is very similar.
I'd have to agree there with Ash. Perhaps maybe the humidity might be a little bit high here, and more frequently high. We tend to get more of sometimes a dry heat, but that's not consistent all the time. Sometimes we find ourselves sticking to our leather couches and peeling ourselves off and stuff like that, or burning our feet on the beach because it's so hot. And you might have seen a video of kind of like an Australian almost doing like a crab run from the water to the beach to their towel back to their car because the sand or the concrete's so hot that you have to quickly move your feet, otherwise they get red hot super quick.
Yeah, yes. Moving on, question 3. How strong is the UK monarch's influence in Australia? Jared, would you like to take lead?
Yeah, there seems to be a pretty good interest in Australian monarchism. So realistically, the UK monarch doesn't realistically have executive power in Australia. They can't pass legislation. They do ascend laws, so they approve laws to go through, but that's on the advice of the Prime Minister. So the UK monarch, in effect, is just a figurehead for us that we use as a safeguard in our constitutional monarchy to ensure that the parliamentarians and the government works to our best interest. However, the influence is waning. There is talk of another republic referendum happening, so Australia may decide to go down the avenue of other countries and become a republic where we'll have an Australian head of state. So, but however, in saying that, we have to wait for the referendum and what Australians decide in that democratic vote, whether they'd like to keep the influence of the United Kingdom monarchy or switch to more of an Australian head of state. So I think to answer that question, you should just keep an eye out on Australian politics over the next couple of years, and you might find that Australia will no longer celebrate the reign of King Charles, or we may continue to be a constitutional monarchy into the 21st century.
Yeah, I think, Jared's answered it quite well. Moving on to question 4, would you consider conducting projects which collaborate with IPGKBA? Yeah, I think with technology these days, I think it's something that's definitely possible, and I think it would be very interesting. I've definitely enjoyed my time on the campus, and I've made some friends, so that's something that I would like to do. Jared?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back and do projects, even recommend or bring other education students here so they're more familiar and understanding of what to expect, so they've kind of got like a leader or a guide. But I would absolutely and really enjoy coming back as frequently as possible, sharing as much knowledge, and really engaging the cross-Australia-Malaysian relationship so that we can really benefit each other's education systems, because Australia is part of Asia in the 21st century, so we really need to share and enjoy our connections, and the best way to do that is by coming and visiting these schools so that we develop a relationship and we develop a harmony between us and the education sector. And even the flip side, I'd highly recommend if any of you guys get the opportunity to come down and teach in Australia and come and visit or study, because it's a fantastic opportunity. And if you find Asheras online, you could probably even score some free accommodation at some point. So absolutely, I would love to come back and participate in as many projects as you guys are willing to have us back for, realistically.
100%. Last question. What was the most memorable event that has happened to you during your stay in Malaysia? I believe that would be the language barrier. I was trying to say thank you at a restaurant. I was trying to say terima kasih. Yeah, but unfortunately I was only saying kasih, so I think the waitress thought I was proposing my love to her as opposed to thanking her for providing me with the dish. I think that's a very memorable moment, and I think in conjunction with that, learning how to properly say it was a really good moment. So yeah, I'm very thankful for the people that have helped me on the campus.
I think the best thing's been how friendly everyone is. I wasn't sure kind of the general attitude, like you're always unsure of how different people are going to perceive you as an Australian when you go overseas, but everyone's been so lovely and welcoming, and we've really had no issues with talking to any Malaysians at all. Everyone's been so helpful and friendly, and it's just been so amazing to come here and be welcomed with such open arms when we're basically complete strangers to you guys. So you've effectively treated us like family, and we're just acquaintances. So I find that an amazing aspect of your culture, because Australia would be quite similar, but it's just I was uncertain as to what the cultural disposition would be towards an Australian. So the idea that you guys are so welcoming with open arms has been amazing, and I've learnt so much because of that, because without that warm kind of introduction that you've given us all, I I don't think we would have been able to engage as much in the schooling experience and in the community, because you guys have shown us around, you guys have given us food, you guys have given us fantastic hospitality, and we absolutely would love to repay you in some way, shape or form by participating in projects, or even just sharing our emails and helping you guys out with your education and things like that, because I'm sure you guys would love to have an English speaker help you out if necessary, and we'd be more than happy to help you guys out, because we both value, Ash and I value education highly, so we just want the best for all students, irrespectively whether they're in Malaysia or Australia or anywhere in the world really, because that's pretty much our goal as teachers, to just make the world a better place.
Yeah, I agree entirely, and I think that's a good way to wrap it up. If anyone has any questions, our Instagram accounts are below, so feel free to follow us and message us. And yeah, thank you so much for having us. Terima kasih.